You know that feeling when someone tells you something's impossible? That bitter taste in your mouth when experts dismiss your idea before you've even finished explaining it? Well, let me tell you about Marcus Thompson, a mechanic from rural Nebraska who turned that dismissal into the most revolutionary agricultural breakthrough of our time. And trust me, you're going to want to stay for what happens when the corporate giants realize they've been sleeping on the invention that could feed the world. The year was 2019, and Marcus was staring at his neighbor's dying cornfield, watching another family farm slip toward bankruptcy. The drought had been merciless, the soil was depleted, and traditional farming methods were failing spectacularly. But Marcus wasn't just any neighbor. He was a guy who could rebuild a transmission with his eyes closed, and had spent decades tinkering with machinery that most people threw away. What he saw in that field wasn't just crop failure. He saw a puzzle begging to be solved. The corporate agriculture executives in their glass towers, they saw market consolidation opportunities. Marcus rolled up his sleeves and got to work in his garage, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 repair jobs and the stubborn belief that there had to be a better way. His wife Sarah would later tell reporters that she'd never seen him more focused, more driven. He'd disappear into that garage for 16-hour stretches, emerging only for coffee and the occasional sandwich, muttering about moisture retention and root optimization. The neighbors thought he'd finally cracked under the pressure of watching their community crumble. They had no idea he was building their salvation. The device itself looked deceptively simple. A cylindrical apparatus about the size of a coffee can, with what appeared to be nothing more than a series of sensors and a small solar panel. Marcus called it the soil sink system, though the name wouldn't stick until much later. To the untrained eye, it looked like something you might find in a Radio Shack bargain bin. But this unassuming little device was about to rewrite the rules of agriculture in ways that would make the Green Revolution look like a warm-up act. The technology behind it was brilliant in its simplicity, which was exactly why the agricultural establishment would initially dismiss it as amateur-hour nonsense. Marcus had figured out something that billion-dollar research departments had somehow missed. Soil doesn't just need nutrients and water, it needs them at precisely the right time, in precisely the right combinations, delivered through a feedback loop that responds to real-time conditions. His device didn't just monitor soil conditions, it actively communicated with a network of similar devices, creating what he called a living map of agricultural need. Each soil sink unit would analyze moisture levels, nutrient density, pH balance, and even microbial activity, then share that data with neighboring units to optimize resource distribution across entire farming communities. The first test came on his own small plot behind the garage. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as Marcus installed 3 prototype devices in soil that hadn't successfully grown anything in 2 years. She later admitted she was preparing for another disappointment, another failed project to add to the collection of good intentions that filled their barn. But within 6 weeks, that dead earth was producing tomatoes that made their grocery store varieties look like sad, flavorless imposters. The plants weren't just surviving. They were thriving in ways that defied everything Marcus thought he knew about farming. The tomatoes were larger, more flavorful, and seemed almost immune to the pests and diseases that had plagued the region for years. More importantly, they were growing in soil that required 60% less water than traditional methods, and produced yields that were consistently 30% higher than comparable plots using conventional techniques. Marcus documented everything obsessively, taking photographs, measuring yields, testing soil composition weekly. He knew he was onto something big, but he also knew that in a world where agricultural innovation was dominated by multinational corporations with unlimited resources, a mechanic from Nebraska claiming to have revolutionized farming would be met with skepticism at best, ridicule at worst. So he decided to prove it worked before he tried to explain how it worked. The second test was more ambitious. Marcus approached 5 struggling farmers in his county, offering to install his devices free of charge in exchange for detailed harvest data. These weren't desperate gamblers. These were experienced farmers who'd been working the land for decades and were facing the very real possibility of losing their family farms to debt and climate change. They had everything to lose and very little to gain from trusting some mechanic's garage invention. But desperation has a way of making people receptive to long shots, and Marcus's quiet confidence was surprisingly persuasive. Tom Rodriguez had been farming corn and soybeans for 30 years and was 6 months away from bankruptcy. His fields had been ravaged by inconsistent rainfall and soil depletion, and his yields had been dropping steadily for 5 years running. When Marcus showed up with his box of strange devices, Tom's first instinct was to politely decline. He'd already tried every fertilizer, every irrigation system, every piece of advice the Agricultural Extension Office could offer. Nothing had worked, and he wasn't interested in wasting time on another miracle cure. But Marcus didn't pitch miracles. He pitched data. He showed Tom the documentation from his own test plot, the soil analyses, the yield comparisons. He explained the technology in plain English, without the buzzwords and corporate speak that usually accompanied agricultural innovation. Most importantly, he offered to install the system for free, with no contracts, no obligations, and no upfront costs. Tom figured he had nothing left to lose except the farm itself, so he agreed to let Marcus install 20 soil sync devices across his main cornfield. The installation process was surprisingly straightforward. Each device required nothing more than insertion into the soil at strategic points throughout the field, connected by a simple wireless network that Marcus had designed to be foolproof. The solar panels charged small batteries that powered the sensors and communication systems, and the whole network could be monitored through a basic smartphone app that Marcus had coded himself during late-night programming sessions. The devices immediately began their work, analyzing soil conditions and communicating with each other to create a comprehensive map of the field's needs. Within days, Tom could see patterns in his soil that 30 years of farming experience had never revealed. Areas that he'd assumed were uniformly fertile showed dramatic variations in nutrient levels and moisture retention. Sections of his field that had consistently underperformed were revealed to have specific deficiencies that could be addressed with targeted interventions. The system didn't just identify problems, it suggested solutions. When soil sensors detected low nitrogen levels in one quadrant, the network would recommend specific organic amendments and optimal timing for application. When moisture sensors registered drought stress, the system would map the most efficient irrigation patterns to maximize water usage while minimizing waste. The devices worked together like a hive mind, constantly adjusting recommendations based on real-time conditions and learning from the results of previous interventions. Tom had never seen anything like it. His corn plants were not only growing faster and larger than previous years, they were developing root systems that seemed almost engineered for optimal nutrient absorption. The plants appeared healthier, more resistant to pests, and better adapted to weather fluctuations. By mid-season, it was clear that something extraordinary was happening in Tom's field. Word spreads fast in rural communities, especially when that word involves the possibility of salvation for struggling farmers. By late summer, Marcus was fielding calls from farmers across 3 states, all wanting to know about the mysterious devices that were transforming Tom Rodriguez's farm. The agricultural establishment, however, was less enthusiastic. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, Director of Sustainable Agriculture Research for Megagrow Corporation, dismissed the SoilSync system in a trade publication interview as unproven technology being promoted by unqualified individuals. She pointed out that Marcus had no formal education in agriculture, no peer-reviewed research to support his claims, and no understanding of the complex regulatory requirements that governed agricultural innovation. Her critique was technically accurate and completely missed the point. Marcus didn't need credentials to observe that his system worked. The harvest results spoke for themselves with a clarity that no amount of academic skepticism could obscure. Tom Rodriguez's corn yield was 43% higher than his previous best year, achieved with 30% less water and 25% less fertilizer than conventional methods required. The quality of the corn was exceptional, with consistently higher protein content and better resistance to storage decay. Even more impressive, soil tests conducted after harvest showed that the earth was actually healthier than it had been before planting, something that conventional agriculture rarely achieved. The other 4 test farmers reported similar results across different crops and soil types. Wheat yields increased by an average of 38%, soybean production jumped by 41%, and vegetable crops showed improvements that bordered on the miraculous. Sarah Martinez, who had been struggling to keep her organic vegetable farm profitable, saw her tomato production increase by 52% while maintaining her organic certification. Her carrots grew larger and more flavorful than anything she produced in 20 years of farming, and her soil showed marked improvements in organic matter content and beneficial microbial activity. The success stories were impossible to ignore, but the agricultural industry was determined to try. MegaGrow Corporation, which controlled approximately 37% of the commercial seed market and had invested billions in proprietary agricultural technologies, had particular reason to be concerned about Marcus's invention. The soil sink system threatened to make their expensive, chemically dependent farming methods obsolete, potentially costing them hundreds of millions in annual revenue. Their response was swift and predictably corporate. Dr. Hartwell published a more detailed critique of the soil sink system in Agricultural Innovation Quarterly, questioning the methodology of Marcus's testing, the lack of long-term studies, and the potential environmental risks of unregulated agricultural technology. The article was carefully crafted to raise doubts about the system's safety and effectiveness without making claims that could be easily disproven. It was a masterclass in corporate doubt-mongering, designed to slow adoption of the technology until MegaGrow could develop their own competing system or find ways to acquire Marcus's patents. The article included quotes from other agricultural experts who expressed concern about amateur inventors disrupting established farming practices and suggested that farmers should stick with proven methods developed by qualified professionals. Reading Dr. Hartwell's critique, Marcus felt that familiar bitter taste of dismissal, but this time it was accompanied by something else: determination. He'd spent his entire adult life being underestimated by people with fancy degrees and corporate backing, and he'd learned that the best response to skepticism was simply to be right. So instead of engaging in academic debates or corporate public relations battles, Marcus decided to expand his testing program and let the results speak for themselves. He reached out to agricultural extension offices in 12 states, offering free installation and monitoring of soil sink systems for any farmers willing to participate in expanded trials. The response was overwhelming. Within 6 months, over 300 farmers had volunteered to test the technology on their own land. Marcus found himself traveling constantly, installing devices, training farmers on the monitoring software, and documenting results across an extraordinary variety of crops and growing conditions. The expanded trials revealed the true versatility of the soil sink system. In California's Central Valley, the devices helped almond growers reduce water consumption by 40% while maintaining yield quality. In Iowa cornfields, farmers reported not just higher yields but improved soil health that suggested sustainable productivity gains for years to come. In Florida orange groves, the system's ability to optimize fertilizer application resulted in fruit with higher vitamin C content and better color development. Cotton farmers in Texas found that the soil sink network could predict and prevent pest infestations by monitoring soil conditions that influenced insect breeding cycles. Each success story added to a growing body of evidence that Marcus's invention wasn't just effective, it was revolutionizing how crops could be grown across virtually every agricultural sector. The data from these trials was overwhelming in both volume and consistency. Across different crops, soil types, and climate conditions, farms using the soil sink system showed average yield increases of 35 to 45%, water usage reductions of 25 to 40%, and fertilizer savings of 20 to 35%. More importantly, soil health assessments conducted by independent agricultural laboratories consistently showed improvements in organic matter, beneficial microbial populations, and overall soil structure. The technology wasn't just producing better harvests, it was rehabilitating damaged farmland and creating conditions for sustained agricultural productivity. Environmental scientists began taking notice as well. Dr. Rebecca Stone, a soil ecologist at the University of California, Davis, conducted an independent study of 12 farms using the soil sink system and found that the technology was essentially creating regenerative agriculture conditions automatically. The device's ability to optimize nutrient timing and delivery was allowing crops to develop more efficient root systems, which in turn supported healthier soil microbiology and better carbon sequestration. Her published research suggested that widespread adoption of the technology could not only improve agricultural productivity but also contribute significantly to climate change mitigation through enhanced soil carbon storage. The corporate response to these findings was predictably aggressive. MegaGrow Corporation filed patent challenges against Marcus's soil sink technology, claiming that key components of his system infringed on their existing intellectual property. They initiated what Marcus's lawyer described as nuisance litigation, legal challenges designed not to win in court but to drain Marcus's resources and slow the technology's adoption. They also began developing their own soil monitoring systems, clearly reverse-engineered from publicly available information about the soil sink devices, while simultaneously lobbying for regulatory requirements that would favor large corporations over individual inventors. Dr. Hartwell appeared at agricultural conferences across the country, presenting research that questioned the long-term sustainability of amateur agricultural innovations and emphasizing the importance of responsible development by established companies with proper resources and expertise. Her presentations were well-funded, professionally produced, and designed to cast doubt on Marcus's work without directly challenging results that were becoming increasingly difficult to dispute. The pressure campaign extended beyond academic conferences. MegaGrow began offering discount packages to farmers who agreed not to adopt, quote, unproven technologies, essentially bribing customers to avoid the soil sink system. They funded studies by agricultural economists who questioned whether small farmers had the technical expertise to properly implement advanced soil monitoring systems, suggesting that such technologies were better suited for large-scale corporate farming operations. The message was clear. Leave innovation to the professionals, stick with methods that have proper corporate backing, and don't trust garage inventors who promise impossible improvements. Marcus watched this corporate offensive with a mixture of anger and amusement. These were the same people who had dismissed his invention as worthless amateur nonsense, now investing millions of dollars to prevent farmers from using technology that they claimed didn't work. The contradiction was almost comical if it weren't so threatening to the farmers who desperately needed better agricultural solutions. But Marcus had one advantage that MegaGrow Corporation couldn't match. His technology actually worked, and hundreds of farmers could testify to its effectiveness. The turning point came when Senator Patricia Williams, chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee, visited Tom Rodriguez's farm as part of a fact-finding tour on sustainable farming practices. Senator Williams had been hearing conflicting reports about revolutionary new agricultural technology developed by a Nebraska mechanic, and she wanted to see the results firsthand. Tom walked her through his fields, explaining how the soil sink devices had transformed his operation from near bankruptcy to the most profitable farm in the county. He showed her side-by-side comparisons of treated and untreated soil, yield data from 3 growing seasons, and soil health assessments that documented measurable improvements in every category. Senator Williams was impressed, but she was also a politician who understood the complexity of agricultural policy. She asked pointed questions about safety testing, environmental impact assessments, and regulatory oversight. Tom's answers were straightforward. The devices used no chemicals, required no external power sources, and had been tested extensively by independent laboratories. The technology worked exactly as advertised, with no negative side effects and consistently positive results. More importantly, it was helping family farms survive in an increasingly difficult economic environment while producing food more efficiently and sustainably than conventional methods. The senator's visit generated national media attention. including a feature story on 60 Minutes that introduced Marcus and his invention to millions of viewers. The segment included interviews with farmers from 6 different states, all describing dramatic improvements in their operations after adopting the SoilSync technology. It showed before and after footage of transformed farmland, presented yield data that even skeptics couldn't dispute, and featured Marcus explaining his invention in his characteristic plain-spoken style. The 60 Minutes piece was devastating to Mega-Grow Corporation's narrative about unproven amateur technology, primarily because it let the results speak for themselves without corporate spin or academic hedging. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Marcus's website crashed within hours of the broadcast as thousands of farmers tried to obtain information about the SoilSync system. Agricultural supply stores were flooded with inquiries about the devices, and farming publications that had previously ignored or dismissed the technology suddenly wanted to feature it on their covers. More importantly, venture capital firms and agricultural investment groups began reaching out to Marcus with offers to fund large-scale production and distribution of his invention. For the first time since he'd started this journey, Marcus had the resources to compete directly with corporate agriculture giants who had been trying to suppress his technology. The investment offers were substantial, but Marcus was careful about maintaining control over his invention's development and distribution. He'd watched too many innovative technologies get bought by corporations and either shelved to protect existing profit streams or modified beyond recognition to serve corporate interests rather than farmer needs. Instead of selling his patents or accepting traditional venture capital arrangements, Marcus structured licensing deals that guaranteed broad access to the technology while generating revenue for continued research and development. He established the Agricultural Innovation Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to developing and distributing farming technologies that prioritized farmer success over corporate profits. The foundation's first initiative was a program to provide free SoilSync systems to small farmers who couldn't afford the commercial price, funded by licensing revenue from larger agricultural operations. The program was designed to ensure that the technology's benefits wouldn't be limited to wealthy farmers or corporate operations, addressing one of the primary concerns that agricultural policy experts had raised about innovative farming technologies. Within 2 years of the 60 Minutes broadcast, over 12,000 farms across North America were using some version of the SoilSync technology. The results continued to validate Marcus's original observations: dramatically improved yields, reduced resource consumption, and measurably healthier soil conditions. Independent studies by agricultural universities consistently confirmed the technology's effectiveness, and long-term assessments showed that the benefits were sustainable and even cumulative over time. Soil health continued to improve with extended use of the system, suggesting that the technology was creating positive feedback loops that enhanced agricultural productivity while rebuilding damaged farmland. The international response was equally dramatic. Agricultural ministries from 17 countries sent representatives to observe SoilSync installations and evaluate the technology for potential adoption in their own farming systems. The European Union fast-tracked approval for the devices after trials in Germany and France showed remarkable success with both traditional crops and organic farming operations. Developing nations were particularly interested in technology that could improve food security without requiring massive infrastructure investments or dependence on expensive chemical inputs. The Indian government initiated a pilot program to test SoilSync systems in regions affected by drought and soil degradation, with preliminary results suggesting that the technology could help millions of small farmers improve their productivity and economic stability. African agricultural ministers expressed interest in technology that could help address food security challenges while building long-term soil health in regions where traditional farming methods had been struggling with climate change impacts. The global adoption of Marcus's invention was transforming not just individual farms but entire agricultural economies. Regions that had been experiencing agricultural decline were seeing renewed prosperity as farmers achieved higher yields with lower costs and reduced environmental impact. Rural communities that had been losing population to urban areas were experiencing economic revitalization as farming became more profitable and sustainable. The technology was proving that innovation didn't have to come from corporate research departments or university laboratories. Sometimes the most revolutionary breakthroughs emerged from practical problem-solving by people who understood real-world challenges and had the determination to find better solutions. Megagrow Corporation's response to the global success of the soil sink technology was a grudging acknowledgement that they had been wrong about both the invention and its creator. Dr. Hartwell published a follow-up article in Agricultural Innovation Quarterly that praised the unexpected effectiveness of soil monitoring systems and emphasized Megagrow's commitment to developing similar technologies. The article carefully avoided mentioning Marcus by name or acknowledging that his amateur invention had proven superior to anything their billion-dollar research division had produced. Instead, it focused on the company's new partnership with several tech firms to develop next-generation agricultural monitoring systems that would incorporate lessons learned from recent field innovations. The corporate pivot was transparently face-saving, but it also represented a significant victory for Marcus and the farmers who had supported his work. The agricultural establishment had been forced to acknowledge that innovation could come from unexpected sources and that practical solutions often trumped theoretical expertise. More importantly, the success of the soil sink technology had demonstrated that farmers didn't have to accept corporate claims about what was possible or impossible in agricultural productivity. They could demand better solutions, test new approaches, and choose technologies based on results rather than marketing campaigns. 5 years after Marcus first installed those prototype devices in his neighbor's failing cornfield, the agricultural landscape had been fundamentally transformed. The soil sink technology and its various iterations were being used on over 50,000 farms worldwide, consistently delivering the productivity improvements and environmental benefits that Marcus had originally promised. Soil health assessments in regions with widespread adoption of the technology showed measurable improvements in carbon sequestration, water retention, and biodiversity, suggesting that the devices were contributing to broader environmental restoration efforts beyond their immediate agricultural benefits. Marcus himself had evolved from a small-town mechanic into an internationally recognized agricultural innovator, though he remained based in Nebraska and continued to personally respond to emails from farmers who had questions about implementing the technology. He'd established research partnerships with agricultural universities around the world, but he insisted that all innovations remain focused on practical solutions that could be implemented by working farmers, rather than theoretical advances that served academic interests. His garage workshop had been replaced by a proper research facility, but the underlying philosophy remained the same: identify real problems, develop practical solutions, and measure success by results rather than credentials or corporate approval. The Agricultural Innovation Foundation had grown into a significant force in sustainable farming advocacy, providing free technical support to small farmers, funding research into environmentally beneficial agricultural technologies, and lobbying for policy changes that supported innovation and farmer autonomy. The Foundation's success had inspired similar organizations around the world, creating a global network of agricultural innovators who prioritized practical solutions over corporate profits. Marcus often reflected on the journey from that first moment of frustration in his neighbor's dying cornfield to the global transformation of agricultural practices that his invention had sparked. The path had been longer and more complicated than he'd originally expected, filled with corporate opposition, regulatory challenges, and the constant pressure to prove that a mechanic from Nebraska could revolutionize an industry dominated by multinational corporations and university research departments. But the results spoke for themselves with a clarity that no amount of skepticism or corporate opposition could obscure. Farmers around the world were growing more food, using fewer resources, and building healthier soil conditions that would support agricultural productivity for generations to come. Rural communities were thriving, environmental conditions were improving, and food security was being enhanced in regions that had been struggling with agricultural challenges for decades. The soil sink technology had proven that innovation could emerge from unexpected places, that practical problem-solving often produced better results than theoretical research, and that determination combined with genuine expertise could overcome corporate opposition and academic skepticism. Derrick had transformed from an underestimated mechanic into a global agricultural revolutionary. But more importantly, he had demonstrated that revolutionary change was possible when someone had the courage to challenge conventional wisdom and the persistence to prove that better solutions were achievable. The bitter taste of early dismissal had been replaced by the satisfaction of knowing that his work was feeding the world more efficiently and sustainably than anyone had thought possible. And in his characteristic, understated way, Derrick considered that a pretty good outcome for a project that had started with nothing more than curiosity about why his neighbor's corn wasn't growing.